Well, good afternoon. My name is Bryan Slone. I'm the president of the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And on behalf of the Nebraska Chamber Foundation today, welcome to our Nebraska Economy and Workforce Dashboard update. And before we start, I just want to make sure we thank our sponsors, Balin and Novozymes, which have continued to sponsor our Economic and Workforce Dashboard, which for those of you who haven't seen it is located on the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce website, any chamber website in the foundation area, and it's easy to navigate to and has the latest and greatest in terms of economic and workforce data that at least we're looking at continually at the chamber as we think about economic and workforce policies in Nebraska. So it gives me great pleasure if we could move to the next slide to introduce our guest today, and I'm glad to have Josie with us. Josie Schaffer is with the Center for Public Affairs Research. We have used this group at UNO for several years now. And in fact, when we first started focusing on the workforce issues, the greatest difficulty we had was finding good data. And it turned out the best data we could find was clearly at the Center for Public Affairs and Research. They also have their own dashboards, and I recommend we look at those. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But Josie, welcome. And thanks for being with us today. I think you're still muted, so welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Your dashboard is a wonderful tool as well, and so I'm excited to talk about it with you.
So before we jump in, Josie, I'm just tell people a little bit about your group. Where we got introduced to your group is really up in the right-hand corner, the demographic data on the state, and it really was the first time we started seeing the effect of the lower birth rates and what that effect was going to have on workforce over time. You have several other data missions at the Center for Public Affairs Research, but just a plug for you guys that any of our members and guests who would like to see more of the data that UNO gathers, the website address is on the top of this page. So Josie, let's go ahead and get started with our own foundation website, and we'll take the audience today through some of the current data in that website, and I'd be interested in some of your insights into how we're thinking about this data, because it makes a difference. So just to level set, these are screens directly from our Nebraska Chamber Workforce and Economic Data website. And let's start with this population and jobs trend forecast. So this is data from 2016 through forecasted through 2016, the blue being population, the red being jobs. And what I'm seeing there is a significant population growth projected through 2026, not massive, but 60,000 people is a fairly big number. And I'm looking today at about 50 to 80,000 jobs being open. And my initial reaction to this is, well, at least we might start filling some of these jobs that we have. We're going to get into this a little bit later when we start tearing apart this data. That's not really the truth, because much of this blue column are people that look like me, unfortunately. I'm 65. Depending on how long my wife makes me work, I'm not sure I'm going to be in the workforce all that much longer. So Josie, what do we take from this population and jobs forecast from your standpoint?
So population 2010 to 2020 actually grew 7%. So a little bit more than is projected. You all have those projections around 3% for 2021 to 2026. So why did we grow so strong 2010 to 2020, and then now we're being a little more conservative about that? And that is our aging population. So population changes in one of three ways. One is natural change, births minus deaths. And we are still positive for that, right? I like to say most people in Nebraska are Nebraskans. They were born here. We're about 2 to 1 births to deaths. So that is our main source of growth. That is our ultimate source of growth. Then we have domestic migration, and we're negative for that. So more people leave the state every year than come to the state every year. Not a huge number, but it's negative. And then international migration, about 0.5%. So positive, people still coming here from international locations, but not a huge number. So our birth rate being strong now is how we had that last decade of about 7% growth. but the majority of that population is still in that baby boomer age, about 58 to 76. So that group was one of the larger generations. Millennials have just recently taken that. And they're actually still pretty young baby boomers. So, and folks are living longer. And so that large population, that large age group will stay in Nebraska for a lot longer. And that's where our 2-to-1 natural change rate might start to edge out as people do have fewer kids and that baby boom generation stays in the population a little bit longer. So that's why that overall forecast for growth is starting to go a little bit slower. And then I would just say sort of absent, right? Things can change. Forecasts are projections of the future. If I knew the future, I would probably not be here. But absent some sort of big population dynamic, these forecasts are pretty conservative, but accurate.
Yeah, a couple things, Josie, too. When we talk about birth rates, so I'm using some data as I'm going around the state this week. I'm actually in Kearney right now, talking about our birth rates. Our birth rates are, like the rest of the nation, substantially down from 1960, from 1970, from 1980. The class of seniors graduating from high school this year isn't very much bigger than the class that graduated when I graduated in 1975, of all things. It's just pretty steady and actually slightly declining. We're going to see this in a future slide, that this pipeline of young people is not growing yet. Our economy is growing, our jobs are growing. I suspect that this workforce issue is going to be with us for a couple more decades when we start looking at that detailed data. And then the second piece I'd like you to comment on is, I'm looking at that jobs data on the right, and you go to 2020, where there was the reduction in jobs. At first you say, well, there was a reduction in jobs in 2020, but that's a very small reduction for COVID. That was the beginning of COVID. More than any other state, or more than most states at least, we kept people employed better than other states. And so that decline, and now the increase ever since, and even in 2021, which was another COVID year, jobs kept coming back with a vengeance in Nebraska. We have a very strong economy full of jobs at this point. And that's all positive. Any thoughts on either of those points?
So your points about COVID are absolutely true, right? We had all of sort of the negative rates were lesser than the US rates, lesser than a lot of other states. We actually worked with you all, as well as lots of organizations, on 2 business surveys during COVID. And I just remember being utterly impressed with the focus was on keeping people employed. And it's pretty consistent in our economy and history that we have really high labor force participation rates. We really focus on being in the workforce and working really hard, and we do a really good job. So we did keep people employed, certainly had some, downturn. So you see that little bit spike, but you see us coming back really strong. We actually, jobs came back strong, new establishments came back strong, actually stronger than they had been in previous years. So some really exciting growth happened as a result of sort of that reset. But we also had lots of folks choose to retire early. That's why you saw our number of jobs come back strong, but the number of folks to fill jobs, that workforce shortage that we're still experiencing, also come back at the same time. It had everything to do with 2 things. One, we had more people that retired a little bit earlier than would have because of COVID. And then you saw a lot of folks leave certain types of jobs that could not go remote as easily. And then they took that time to retrain, retool, and come back into the labor force in different jobs. And so that's some of those jobs that are still open and where we're seeing the most of those workforce shortages. I think we'll talk about that more later.
We'll talk some more about this, Josie, in terms of what the projection is on these workforce shortages, but it is sort of a combination of low birth rates plus my age group aging out of the workforce fairly rapidly at this point, and we tend to be the fastest growing age group.
Absolutely. And our projections, we're really just on the cusp of that, right? With baby boomers being still in the workforce, we're going to feel this over time pretty acutely.
Okay, well, let's move to the next page. And as we do that, let me remind the audience, if you've got questions for either Josie or me in this process today, let's either put those in the Q&A or the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take those as we go. We'll make this fairly informal today. But we really want to get a handle around some of the data in this workforce issue. Talk to me about educational attainment. Josie, I always have had the impression Nebraska is toward the higher end in terms of educational attainment. We do pretty good on this scale, and our public education is pretty good. Am I wrong on that?
No, you are absolutely right. I don't know the rankings in the states, but we are in, above the 50% mark for our levels of higher educational attainment. We do pretty well. We do, there's about 400,000 people here in the state working with a bachelor's degree or more. We actually have the highest labor force participation rate for folks with a bachelor's degree or more in the country. So, sometimes I think the university people think, oh, we educate them and then they go out. Some do leave, but we have lots of folks here working. We do have this idea of brain drain. It is real here and it's actually increasing, but it's not huge. So we've been tracking this since about 2010 and it's been about 2,500 a year. So lots of folks come in every year, lots of folks leave every year, but net we tend to lose folks with a bachelor's degree or more. That's why we call it brain drain. It's been around 2,500. Then I remember everyone during COVID was maybe thinking folks with bachelor's degrees would come here, low cost of living, great quality of life, and work remotely. We did not see that. Actually, in 2020, it went up to about 4,500. And now initial estimates for 2021, they are very initial, so they're not, they haven't kind of been added to that 5-year data to make sure we feel really confident in them, but those look even a little higher at around 6,700. So the trend is actually increasing. And I think it's just important to say, the reason we like a well-educated Nebraskan, it's good for quality of life. It's good for job opportunities. They tend to make more money. They tend to fill those high wage jobs that are growing a lot faster. We've seen rates of jobs that require a bachelor's degree rising really rapidly nationally and in Nebraska. So it's to meet that workforce demand really, but we are losing some every year.
Josie, I'm going to make a couple points that I think are right, but I would be interested in your opinion on this. One is my sense is people like to point to one issue being the cause of this workforce problem. And a lot of people point to this brain drain, this out migration. The numbers are material and we absolutely need to retain more of our young people, particularly educated young people here. But those numbers compared to 80,000 open jobs are pretty small. And compared to the lowering birth rates, I think the lowering birth rates are somewhere between 11 and 12,000 lower today than they were in 1960. The birth rates is still driving the bulk of this workforce issue, but there is this brain drain issue. And the second piece is we're going to talk later about you and I think both agree that the movement between states, the number one factor is jobs, is appealing jobs, and typically technology-based jobs, even within sectors, whether it be agriculture or manufacturing, some element of technology there. And particularly when you get to the higher educated, that the need for technology in our jobs, because these people aren't moving because they want a beach or water or mountains, which is the general myth. They're moving because there's specific jobs, and particularly technology-enabled jobs that they're interested in. Am I right on that?
You are right on all 3 points. So we are losing folks every year and we should explore that. It's really important. But the workforce shortage is not a result of this brain drain. It is the larger population dynamics. So that's really clear. This other idea of why they're leaving and exploring that, because I think it would help lots of things about our economy. It is driven by job opportunities and pay. And there's a couple different resources I use to know that. But I think if you just kind of logically, you have to work to make a living, right? I would love to go somewhere and live at the beach and, enjoy outdoor recreation, but I can't without a job. So the number one driver of anyone leaving any state is job opportunities and or pay. So some folks will leave for higher pay. Some folks are looking to be able to get into a job where they have some movement, where they have some growth potential. And because it's a smaller economy here, there are less establishments per person, then some of that job opportunities, especially at those higher level jobs, don't exist. So folks absolutely leave the state for job opportunities and pay. They leave other states for job opportunities and pay. That's how I'm so sure of it too. And so then thinking about how we create more jobs that will attract that group of folks, they're high wage, they're knowledge workers. Knowledge workers tend to lead to more innovation and growth, sort of just by nature of the jobs. They tend to attract more businesses because they want in on that knowledge sector workforce. And so it has a lot of potential for us if we can sort of figure out the job opportunities piece.
Yeah, and so I think we talk a lot about, even agriculture, moving to precision agriculture much faster as a state, in manufacturing, moving to fully automated processing and manufacturing lines as fast as we can. Those technology advancements in Nebraska are huge as we think about this issue. And then I just want to remind people, having grown up in the Sandhills, I always told my children, what do you mean beaches? We have hundreds of miles of beaches in Nebraska. Maybe not an ocean, but hundreds of miles of sand. So no reason to go anywhere else. Let's go to the next slide. And this is one that we're going to spend a little bit of time on, because I think this gets to the raw issue in terms of the pipeline that we're looking at. This is the population change by age group between 2016 and 2021. And I'm going to caveat, anytime you see 2021, you have to take it I don't think it affects population that much, but when we look at jobs and things like that, that was a COVID year. And so in other contexts, 2021 is a difficult year. But when I look at this, it tends to bear out exactly what we're talking about. Is if you look at where all the big green bars are, for the most part, they're down on the bottom. Again, my group 65 and over, we're growing like crazy. But if I look at the younger group, it's just when I net all that stuff, it's just sort of stable to maybe a little decline. Am I right about this, Josie?
Absolutely. And so because there are not a lot of sort of outside population dynamics affecting this, right? Nebraskans, we used to have these higher birth rates, still strong, but they were higher. So you had this really high number of under age 5, and then it would funnel down really quick, that 85 years and over being a really small. Instead, we kind of have this curvy shape, right? And that's because we're not replacing that baby boomer. And you can see that that's that curve, that group of folks 60 to 64, 65 to 69, that was a really large generation. So now they've aged in Nebraska. Actually, I looked this number up. For those over age 65, 94% live in the same house as they did a year ago. 4% live in the same county. So only about 1% are retiring out of state, which I think is really interesting, right? A lot of folks think, oh, they're all going to leave the second they retire. They tend to stay here. So Nebraskans love Nebraska, all age groups. But that under age 5 is not really as large as we would like it. So it would filter into that prime age workforce years. And rather our sort of other big generation is now a little bit older.
So Josie, I look at this just in terms of a state economic strategy. And while being a retirement state works for Florida because it's also a high tourism state, and so there's this massive constant migration in and out of Florida, that works for them. But for us, being a retirement state probably doesn't work for us economically, certainly doesn't work for us on the workforce. And that it does not mean that we don't want retirees to stay in Nebraska. They're a vibrant and important part of our community. And I don't plan to go anywhere other than Nebraska. But that said, this workforce is going to be this younger generation. And, we're clearly attracting and retaining older people, but we're not doing that with younger people. Where do you see this going? I mean, is there anything that's going to change this right now unless we have some changes in policies?
So no, right? The numbers have been really consistent for domestic migration. The numbers have been really consistent for international migration, although I think that has some potential since that one is positive compared to our domestic. You might want to talk about that more, but right outside some shock, this is Nebraskans stay in Nebraska. So this is our population, and those workforce shortages, we're kind of on the peak of that as sort of the millennials, but right, like millennials are older now. They age here as well, and we don't replace as fast. So we are an aging state. We're an aging nation. This kind of wiggly population pyramid is pretty consistent state to state. So outside some shock, like a bunch of folks coming here, we will continue to age, we'll continue to have workforce shortages.
Yeah, one of the other myths out there has always been, well, we understand that a lot of young people leave when they're single, but they'll be back. They'll be back when they have children, and they'll come back in their 30s and 40s, and they'll be back, and we'll repopulate the state with those. That strategy doesn't really bear out with this data.
So there is like a boomerang effect age-wise, but net negative for domestic migration, right? So some people come around that age, and I would say all of you retirees, put your foot down, you're not moving, and the grandchildren should come home. I mean, that could help, but probably not at the scale we're talking about to change this workforce dynamic. So there is some boomerang effect, but generally more leave than come in. And like I said, that's trending up, not down. Small trend up, but it's still enough that you have to think we need some other shock to the system.
And Josie, we've been taking a look at this from a state chamber standpoint and trying to put some numbers behind it, which is, let's assume that, and I think it's a fair assumption today, that we have 50 to 80,000 jobs we can't fill. I think it's fair to assume, unless you tell me differently, I'm looking at these numbers and saying that number is going to go over 100,000 sooner than it comes down, yes, maybe as soon as next year. So what we're really talking about is nothing changes. The workforce problem is going to get worse. And I'm looking at these numbers of really young children. There's nothing that says that the workforce issue isn't going to get worse for 10, 15, 20 years unless something major happens. And major sounds like tens of thousands of new people coming to Nebraska. We're 80,000 down now. We're going to be 100,000 down at some point. It's really, what kind of policy initiatives can we create that would really bring tens of thousands of people to the state, and we have that capacity to put people to work in those numbers. And to some extent, that's going to have to be legal immigration. I'll caveat that illegal immigration doesn't do us any good, because with E-Verify, we can't employ these people generally. But some form of legal immigration, and certainly attracting more 18 to 34-year-olds, probably through universities and colleges, but also making some very significant strides in technology enablement of our core industries, including ag manufacturing, transportation, logistics, financial services, construction, engineering, to create those jobs that really are drawing people. And I think about Salt Lake, which has done such a good job of attracting young people through technology-enabled jobs within core sectors, including manufacturing. Am I wrong about this? Is that a wrong way to approach it from a chamber standpoint?
I think they all make a lot of sense. I think they're all really founded in the data here. We're not pulling domestic migration right now, so we should think about it, and we should think about it long term. But international migration, we're still positive for, and there are some remarkable success stories about the foreign-born population. 71% of the foreign-born is the labor force participation rate for foreign-born. That's above the white labor force participation rate. Extremely hardworking. We recently did some research on entrepreneurship, extremely entrepreneurial. Growing our own businesses might be a sort of better path forward than just focusing on attraction. So extremely entrepreneurial, tend to work in industries that have lots of job openings. We'll get to this, but 28.9 of those foreign-born in Nebraska work in manufacturing. That's the largest industry that they work in, and then they work at these really high rates. That's filling jobs we need. And it's filling jobs we need right now. And so I think it's a great strategy for right now. I think it's something we can make headway on really quickly. There's demand, we have job openings, and there is this real interest in those job openings from folks coming internationally. So I definitely think that one makes sense right now. And then there's lots of things to work on long term. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the workforce mix we have.
Yeah, no, That's great. And I think your points on manufacturing are correct. I don't think a lot of people in the state understand that manufacturing is huge for our state. 1 out of every 10 jobs in Nebraska is related to manufacturing. So this is really important, and their needs are pretty dramatic now, as most anybody.
And
Let's
strong
move-
median earnings too for the foreign-born in manufacturing, around 40,000. So working and participate, at that type of earning, you can fully participate in society in a great way that sort of adds to all different communities around the state.
And ultimately, manufacturing generally tends to have a higher median wage than the rest of the occupations as well. So let's move to the next slide. I'm not going to spend much time on these spending trends. But again, if I look at these spending trends, what I'm seeing is this remarkable recovery from COVID. You see the dramatic decrease, but consumer spending is continuing to drive this economy. There's just absolutely no question to this. Even in the face of what people are expecting is some sort of mild to middle ground recession, consumers are continuing to spend.
And that's because they're employed, and right, if we have jobs and we know wages have gone up recently, then yes, inflation cuts a little bit of that off, but Nebraskans stay employed, they work really hard, they make good wages, and so I think the concerns are founded. We are in unprecedented times. We can't look at other recessions or even periods of inflation and sort of understand this one. Usually jobs go first. So this is kind of strange to have such high employment. Even the numbers from the Bureau of Labor that came out yesterday suggest there are lots of job openings still. So there's not a jobs problem, but we do have sort of these inflationary pressures. But it does seem like folks are going to continue to spend, and as long as we can keep them employed, we can recover quicker, and the shock can be a little less, which is typically true here in Nebraska during all of these sort of past periods of recession.
And I guess, Josie, I think we're all a little guilty. I know I'm guilty at times. We watch the national news. In many respects, the Nebraska economy is sort of unique right now. In large part, to your point, because we kept so many people employed, wages have increased, the economy is strong. Our core sectors, agriculture, manufacturing, construction, finance,
right?
It's certainly education and healthcare, all really strong sectors. That's a very large part of our economy. If you look at the national numbers, though, you kind of get the sense that things are a little more dire. And I assume in other states, it's not all the same. I generally the numbers I'm seeing, we're clearly in the top 10, if not one of the top 1 or 2 strongest economies coming out of COVID.
This is consistently true. We don't always get the same boom periods, but we don't have the harder busts. And so I think we can expect that. Those job numbers are so important in reading these. I do think, the national news, plus it being a very heightened political cycle, there's this sort of push and pull on what is okay, what is acceptable. I think it's really important for us as Nebraskans to sort of, we have a job and we can spend comfortably in our communities, like to focus on those positives, because recessions and inflation, they can be really self-fulfilling. So if we get a little negative or a little too concerned, despite all of these positive indicators, it could hurt us more over the long term too. So it's important to take a really comprehensive look at the indicators. And while inflation is high, lots of these other economic sort of indicators are very positive.
That's a good point, Josie. Thanks. So let's move on to this employment slide. This now starts talking about the industry conversation that we were just having in terms of positives and negatives in terms of jobs. From 2016 to 2061. And, I'll take something like construction. I mean, look at that growth in construction, certainly growth in technology, and even manufacturing jobs continued to grow during COVID, of all things. And if you look at those earnings for manufacturing, strong earnings per worker.
Absolutely. So our economic mix is sort of perfect for right There are strong sectors. We pay very well, particularly in what in other states are lower wage jobs, because we have a lot of them. Actually, if you sort these industries by earnings, so I added up, these earning numbers are a little higher than the ones I use. They probably include some things like maybe overtime or bonus pay versus like annual salary averages. But if you add up all of the jobs that make below median wages, we have more folks in those jobs. And because we have more folks in those jobs, we actually pay competitively for those jobs, right? When you have a lot of those jobs, you have to compete to bring people to take those jobs. But they are really core to sort of our economy right now. They make Nebraska extremely important because they need those goods and services. What I think we do need to think about, and this is getting into sort of that workforce of the future, that knowledge economy, that innovation economy, those folks that we tend to lose to other states. We actually pay less competitively because we have fewer of those jobs. We don't have to compete to bring folks to those jobs, but we're going to want to do that eventually. And so I think we are in a transition period. I think it insulates us right now from some economic shocks, but as an aging population, then we need sort of a higher productivity population to fill those jobs of the future, those tech jobs where you don't need 8 jobs for one automated job or something like that. Then we start to really need to think how we're going to recruit those folks. And I would say right now there's a reason we're not recruiting them, and it's because we don't pay as well and we don't have as many of those jobs.
Josie, very quickly, I want to make a note to the audience that in utilities, the average per worker isn't truly 424,000. This is a data anomaly in this process that we're going to need to work on because Nebraska has public power. I don't think that our true power folks are being represented in this. And two, so this is skewed by a few people who happen to be in the industry, clearly at the executive level. So that's not the real number for that, but I'm going to go down to finance and insurance. And this is another thing I don't think the people understand. So, finance and insurance is a very profitable area for earnings per worker. We are one of the strongest finance and insurance states in the country. Behind New York and Chicago, I would argue that Nebraska is really sort of that third financial center in the country. And it's amazing that the job opportunities and career opportunities here that I don't think most Nebraskans really understand, that we hold that position in the world, that we really have global financial and insurance opportunities here. And I think when young people graduate from college or high school, they have no idea.
Yeah, and it is about internships and awareness building, and in the state and out of the state, to let people know that we have those jobs and they are great jobs here, and that a little bit of knowledge goes a long way in sort of changing folks' perceptions about the workforce.
And then I'm going to skip down to agriculture. And so I've been out in Western Nebraska last few days, and clearly you see that jump in terms of the number of jobs. But I think what we're also going to be seeing is that pay number in agriculture as we move to more technology-based agriculture, and clearly technology skills and finance skills and marketing skills. Most of the farmers and ranchers I know now don't think of themselves as farmers and ranchers. They're marketers, financial experts, technology experts, and they're in the technology business in many cases at this point. Those numbers, as that industry becomes more automated, that earnings per worker, I assume, is going to go up pretty substantially.
So agriculture is really interesting because if I show these numbers to folks in Nebraska, they go, oh my gosh, I would have thought so many more people worked in agriculture. But if I show them to a farmer, they go, that's actually really high, because what used to take lots of workers has been automated, has focused on technology, and now does not take as many workers. There are lots of sort of caveats in the agriculture industry too, right? So our finance and insurance industry is so great because of agriculture. earnings per worker are not too high, but land values are. And so there, it doesn't kind of work like a lot of others where earnings are the main source of income, right? A lot of times it is land value over time that is also really important to sort of agriculture earnings. So that one's kind of different, but you would expect that to both go up, as fewer workers come into that industry for sure.
And then I think in terms of workforce, I'm going to make a general comment here. I get the question all the time, either from colleges, universities, or just business people in the street, is, what exactly, Sloan, what category of workers are we, where is the biggest problem in our workforce problem? And my answer is always the same. It's across the board. It's in every single one of these industries. Agriculture is suffering mightily right now from workforce shortage, as is manufacturing, as is finance and insurance. What I would say in the short term, in these areas where you see the green bars of the increases in jobs, they're feeling it a little harder right now. So they're feeling a little harder in those areas where the growth is occurring, and that includes ag at this point. So any workforce solution really has to be across the board and across all of our industries right now. It's not one single area.
Absolutely. And we can see it a little bit in jobs postings too. There were certain jobs that were more likely to lay off during COVID. And those are the industries that are having the most trouble hiring folks back on. That includes manufacturing, also, accommodation, retail trade, accommodation and food service. And that's because you couldn't go remote. Right. And so if you couldn't work remote, you were more likely to be laid off. Well, our very hardworking Nebraskans went retooled, reskilled, and they came back into different industries. And so some of that is because of that as well. Folks left those jobs. They didn't feel they had the job opportunities post-COVID that they wanted and came back in other places. They did come back, but that left some of those jobs sort of groping for new employees.
Bryan, I'm going to interrupt you if I can. There's a question. Someone's asking where on the industry list nonprofits might be represented.
They are likely, you scroll down, they're probably, Bureau of Labor will lump them in different places. So I will tell you, like, nonprofit managers, agriculture managers are actually all in management, not there. Some of them in a nonprofit might be in professional, scientific, and technical services, as well as social assistance. So it really depends. And different sources, Bureau of Labor versus the United States Census Bureau, will label them slightly different, sort of depending on what they do. But I would bet you're seeing most in either social assistance, professional science, and management.
Yeah.
Class of worker, if you're ever looking at the Census Bureau class of worker, rather than industry, will separate like private from government and nonprofit.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide, which is unemployment claims. And this is sort of myth busting again for me. There's a general perception, and to some extent, if you look nationwide, there may be a grain of truth to it, but there's a perception I know among a lot of people that, well, the issue is we have a bunch of unemployed people. They quit work during COVID, and if they just come back to work, we'll solve this problem. These are Nebraska unemployment claims. We don't have many people in Nebraska unemployed at this point. I mean, is everybody who wants to working at this point, Josie?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really clear in that graph. Obviously, there was a spike, but it came down pretty quickly, right? We all hoped for that V-shaped recovery from COVID, and Nebraska had a perfect V-shaped recovery. I mean, it's really pretty amazing. It did have some spikes and bumps along the way, but you can see we've been lowest in the country for unemployment pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID, and that goes to say the culture here is work. So yeah, there is not this pool of folks that are likely to fill this workforce shortage that are currently unemployed. couple facts on that come from another source from the Bureau of Labor, the Current Population Survey. It asks all these really fine, great questions. If you're unemployed, why are you unemployed? If you're part-time, why are you part-time? And it's consistently in Nebraska has nothing to do with couldn't find work or don't believe there's work or don't want to work, right? Like those are not answers that are given here in Nebraska. Things like went back to school, family obligations. Most people that are part-time are for same reasons, school or family. So folks are retooling, retraining. The workforce shortage is a result of retirements during COVID, and then those population dynamics that just, we don't have a lot of folks to fill every job. But that is not necessarily a pool. Certainly folks like the Heartland Worker Center, right? Like there are people that are probably underemployed that might be a great fit for those jobs that are trying to fill right now. If there's one position, but maybe we could get them into something full-time or pays a little bit better or has more job opportunities for the future. But we don't have a bunch of folks that are unemployed that can fill these workforce shortages.
Hey, Josie, one other piece of what I think is the myth is, I grew up all over Western Nebraska, Central Nebraska, but I lived in Lincoln and Omaha for a while now, and the general prospect was, well, all the growth's going to occur in Omaha and Lincoln, and these smaller towns are just going to get smaller. I have to tell you, I'm sitting in Kearney today, and Kearney has, if not the lowest, one of the very lowest unemployment rates in the state. It's booming. Their housing is short. In fact, housing costs in Kearney are higher than Lincoln at this point. This is a community on the move. It's fun to see, but their unemployment rate would be at national historic lows by any measure. Am I right? I mean, I'm seeing this unemployment not just in Omaha and Lincoln, but it's in growing communities across the state.
On almost every metric of labor force participation rate, we are some of the highest in the country. And that's really exciting. And that means there's great things happening here, but it creates those workforce shortages. And it creates issues in folks moving around the state and being able to explore new opportunities. So it's 100% true. I think we have that map too. We're seeing growth statewide. Even places like Columbus and Norfolk are doing amazingly, but they're going to feel these same challenges too in filling all of those great jobs they're creating.
On the other hand, it tells us if we were able to bring tens of thousands of employees to the state in the next 5 years, most of that would probably drop right to the bottom line in terms of GDP and new tax revenues and accrue to these communities and their ability to, because the capacity to grow, as I've been around the state this week, is amazing. If they just had the people. Am I wrong on that?
I think we all feel it. We've talked to people, the numbers pan out. One of the things I will say is a challenge in rural Nebraska is housing. Someone I think in the chat also mentioned childcare. We have really high labor force participation rates for people with children under age 6. So we know even though childcare is an issue, those folks go to work, they may be underemployed. So that is an area where we might be able to help. But in a lot of these rural communities, there is really low housing stock, right? We haven't built based on the idea that we are going to have the economic booms that we've had or the jobs open that we've had. And so some folks would move and enjoy a different lifestyle if they still had those housing amenities that they wanted. We actually know the number one reason folks move within a state or within a county is housing or housing costs. So to sort of one solution for that workforce challenge, when we do finally figure out a way to bring folks to those communities to take those jobs, they are going to need housing, and housing costs have risen, and not for a lot of the reasons we've seen around the country, but mostly because we have low stock, low availability, high prices.
Yeah, let me jump into this. So I was in Scottsbluff visiting with a really forward thinking company earlier this week, and essentially they came to that conclusion that workforce was costing them their ability to grow as a company. And while the CEO said, I never expected to be in the housing and childcare business. You know, I expected to run this business. It's become clear that the only way we can continue to grow and is to address it and be part of the solution. And this company is building its own housing tract, and it's ultimately going to build its own childcare facility as a business strategy. And we're seeing that across the state with a number of employers. I think it's going to become a lot more common. This housing issue, I always say, if the 50,000 employees showed up today to go to work that we know we could employ tomorrow, we have no place to put them. And housing has now become sort of this threshold issue for every one of our communities, particularly affordable housing that somebody who is new to the workforce or relatively new to the workforce can afford. And I know the Blueprint report in 2019 said we need 40,000 units. That number probably now is 50, 60, 70,000 affordable housing units in Nebraska. If we really want to move on these people numbers, that's part of it. And in the chicken and egg, are you going to tell me that housing comes first?
Yeah, so it is a chicken and egg. I think jobs come first. So
Okay.
Well, we have the jobs, right? So now we have to find the folks to fill the jobs and then housing. So I think we might be there. I don't know that it came first, and it clearly didn't. We didn't build the houses, but we've created the jobs. So now it is about to attract those folks to fill that job. We're going to have to house them.
And
sort
then
of
I
support
heard,
a solution.
Josie, I heard a lot about childcare as I was touring the state, in the sense that, we're not so far past COVID that it's still not affecting people's lives in terms of parents who work. And this childcare capacity issue is a real issue for so many working families. And is it a bigger effect in Nebraska because we do have such high labor participation, both parents working, that we really have to have a better strategy around childcare than other states to continue the track we're on?
So we do have this high rate of both parents working, and that is a big deal. I mean, right, I think we've all felt that push and pull between our families and working. And there are not easy solutions for that, especially if we're trying to recruit people from internationally or out of state where they might not have a big family network here. So I think we have to think about that too. We do have a strong birth rate. It's not enough to keep up, but we're still 2 to 1. Well, that's enough kids each year, with parents wanting to get back into the workforce so quickly that there is some childcare push-pull, and right, quality childcare is such a big deal too, right? To be in the workforce, we work 8 to 5 and most schools let out at 3, right? Like it's a real challenge for almost every family here, right? There's not an easy solution to that. I would also say, just bringing in the COVID thing, a lot of folks worked from home, went remote. We're now down to about 12% of folks are working remotely. That's not a ton. You go to some other states where there's more of a knowledge workforce, which is more likely to work remote, you're seeing 20, 25%. So culturally, we have a culture to go to work here, and that only makes the childcare issue a little bit more acute as well.
Yeah, so let's go to the next slide, and this job concentration. And this is an interesting slide to me because, again, for years we've looked at a slide like this, and as you read this slide, the growth is the darker colored counties. But generally speaking, in past years, we looked at Lancaster, Douglas, and Sarpy, and that was where most of the growth was occurring. And I realize things can skew this one way or another in a county because but look at all the growth in so many counties in terms of jobs. Now, if this was a people chart, it wouldn't look like this. If this was a people chart, you would see most of the counties are not growing in terms of people, and yet the jobs are growing, which is telling me this workforce issue may even be worse down the I-80 corridor and up into Scottsbluff, where I was just at, and even the southern part of the state, because we're creating these jobs, but now we've got to solve the people issue.
Absolutely. And so you do see it along I-80. Columbus and Norfolk have done so well. As I do want to point out, so it's jobs, not people. The people looks very different. And some of these smaller counties that are darker, they're very small counties to begin with. So percentages change, feels pretty big. But still adding 200 jobs some places, that's a lot of jobs when they're not growing. So, right, thinking McPherson's a great one, right? 339 jobs added. It's a small county, but that's more jobs. And that's going to be a workforce shortage.
Yeah, and I could, I travel to Columbus and Norfolk a lot, and I haven't talked about Norfolk and Columbus. Those are two communities that they're just fun to be in right now. In terms of their growth, their vision, where they're headed. But again, workforce is their biggest limiter, just as it is in Lincoln and Omaha and Sarpy County. I know Lincoln, Lancaster County is not as dark as some places in this, and so a little less growth, still growing. Thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so that the university is a major driver in that community. And then during COVID, we were not able to recruit internationally. People didn't move around as much. We actually saw more brain drain. So that's probably sort of leveling a little bit more as a result of COVID than some other communities, right? That industry might have been impacted a little bit more, but will continue to be an area of growth.
Yeah, I would think so.
I think I look at this too, and there have been so many community development efforts across the state. And I think just like business development, if you put time and energy and resources, good things happen. I think Columbus and Norfolk are great examples of that, and lots of pockets across the state.
Yeah, and we're going to actually have an event later on. I think we're going to talk about Lexington at one of our events here coming up too. Lexington is a real success story, and not only in terms of creating jobs, but also in terms of migration into the state. It really is becoming a very neat success story. We're starting to come down on time. I do want to get to some questions. So let's go to the very last chart, which is the one that people enjoy the most. So let's skip on down to where people are moving from and to. One more, migration flows by county. Okay, this is interesting to me, Josie, and Ollie, I'm going to ask you to start with the reds and then we'll go down to the blues. So the reds are a net positive migration. And Josie, I'm looking at these counties, and this goes to the question, why do people move to Nebraska, or why do they leave Nebraska? And I'm looking at this and we say, well, they move for beaches and mountains and lakes, but I'm looking at where they're moving from. So let's go up to the red where we're gaining. And I'm seeing states like Georgia and North Carolina and Florida and California and Texas. These are counties where we're having success. In fact, in Western Nebraska, there's a lot of people moving from California to Western Nebraska and from Colorado to Nebraska. What's going on here?
Jobs, 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 jobs. People move for jobs. So Cobb County, Georgia is Atlanta. Growing area, booming area. It is the southeast, but it's not the beach, so it's warmer, but it's not that close to the beach. In fact, Cumberland County, North Carolina is Fayetteville, large Army base, and then a growing Army base that then creates all of these sort of ancillary services to support that. Actually, in the middle of the state, there's Sandhills. Not that close to the beach, not that close to the mountains, so it is about growth, and then that growth creates more growth. I think we have to think about that multiplier effect. Jefferson County, Kentucky is Louisville, same thing, jobs. They also have a pretty moderate cost of living places compared to some of the mega cities. I think that's important to point out too. Osceola County is Kissimmee, so it's close to the beach, but again, it's not, I wish people moved because they enjoyed the weather. That would mean we're all so well off, we can just do that, but not really a driver. A lot of these places too, like a Pottawatomie County, Iowa, we are still seeing some rural migration, but folks still tend to stay in the state. So that's a lot of people from rural Iowa moving to where there are more jobs in Iowa. which is the other way that Omaha grows. It's not from folks from out of state or from another country. It's Nebraskans moving there because there are more open jobs, although we did see them across the state. So I think jobs explain a lot of these. While the blue ones, I think are more cost of living. So Wake County, North Carolina, for instance, that's Raleigh. They've been growing tremendously for years. I don't think those folks left North Carolina. There are amazing jobs associated with the Research Triangle Park. I think that's more likely than moving 1 or 2 counties over for a little bit lower cost of living. Well, you also see some of the mega cities here. Now, the mega cities are still giant in size, but they are losing people. And I think that has more to do, like Maricopa County, with cost of living.
Okay. But I want to, and my sense is, and it's hard to pull a string directly through these because every one of these individuals is a different story, but we're basically talking jobs, wages, quality of life. Most of these places up above are quality of life places. Jobs, wages, quality of life, and what I would say is sort of a young people's ecosystem, for lack of a better term. Not mountains.
I think Louisville is a great explanation of that, right? Like that city had been kind of run down, rust belts for many, many years, and then big investments in the university drove more of that tech sector. Plus, it was a little bit smaller, so they could attract because of cost of living and cost of doing business. And then it kind of just takes off. Sort of, you need a couple big players, and then things might really turn around fast. So, but for me, and I feel the research really backs this up. I know it can still be thought of as an opinion, but there is a lot of data to suggest that the first reason why someone moves is jobs. And then everything else is like, ooh, an add-on, a benefit. Oh, that's great too. But we have to have funds to enjoy a great quality of life. So that one tends to come first.
So I'm going to jump in with a couple of questions, Brian, before I want to make sure we get them answered before we run out of time. Or if you're going to do it, you go right ahead.
Okay, 2 quick questions. Josie, question on birth rates. Can we share the data? The data, I'm just talking off the top of my head, as I remember it, in 1960, it was over 20 births per 1,000 in Nebraska, about 34,000 some births a year. Currently, it's down to about 12 and change births per 1,000, which is a substantial drop, and about 27 or 20, don't hold me this, 24 to 25,000 births a year, but substantially down. Am I in the ballpark?
It is definitely substantially down. I've never run it per 1,000, so I'd have to look at it too, but absolutely down, and it's down nationally. It's down in Nebraska. Our natural change rate is still pretty strong compared to other states.
Right. I think we're the highest, or first or second highest birth rate.
We are up there, absolutely, but we're holding on, but that doesn't mean growth. That means stability.
Okay, and then I'm going to save you from the final question, Josie, because it's always politically charged. But a question: over 50 years ago, we could put a person on the moon. How come we can't develop a successful and fair legal immigration system? Why and what do we need to do? We're giving this a lot of thought right now. And if you ask me today where I think the best opportunities for this are, and I'm going to leave politics out of this, the best opportunity is, one, fix our visa system. The visa system we have in the country is broken right now. It was designed decades ago. It's understaffed, under-resourced, and work visas, even for people who absolutely, there's no question they should have a work visa, they're taking months and years and sometimes decades. And it's really costing us from both a workforce standpoint and even a student standpoint in some cases. And so the visa system is broken. So fix what we already have and provide more workforce certainty for a lot of people. And I think the way to think about that is that clearly the immigration system that we've had for decades was really built upon 2 things. One, securing the country and making sure that the wrong people weren't coming into the country. But 2, for years and for the decades that our system was built on, the thought was, well, all these immigrants will take jobs from US people. And there might have been some case to that because for most of my life, we've had more workers than jobs. We're suddenly in an environment where we have more jobs than workers, and we can project that that's going to go on for 15 or 20 years. And yet we've got a system that still makes businesses prove every single time that they can't find a worker locally. And so it seems to me that all you have to do is put our unemployment rate up there and our labor participation rate, and we shouldn't have to prove that anymore. We just need a system where clearly people who are not a threat to the United States can obtain work visas. And I'll use refugees as an example. If a Ukrainian refugee came to the state today, estimates are it's 6 to 9 months minimum for them to obtain a work visa. And this is someone that we already know who they are. We can vet them, and we brought them to our state, but now for 6 to 9 months, they can't work because we can't process a visa. We've got to get better at this. And so the visa process is one part. But then I'm going to finish, Josie, and I'll let you get the last word on this. It's one thing to fix our legal immigration system, but I'm also going to challenge us all as a state. Nebraska has to do this better. Even if we had the immigration, we need the housing, the childcare, the education resources to make that work. And we've got to do both things at once. We've got to fix the legal immigration system, but our communities have to build this capacity around housing and childcare. And I'll give you the last word, Josie.
I think that's absolutely right. I think our culture is warm, welcoming, Nebraska nice. I think that's good for our workforce, but we're probably going to have to do a little bit more to solve such a large challenge. So pay, job opportunities, sharing our culture of work, making people feel accepted and able to work, and then providing the sort of necessities to be able to move to a new community and succeed and be successful for their families.
Josie, I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is great, and you and I could go on all day long, and we won't. So thanks to the audience. Thanks again to our sponsors. And Josie, a big thanks. And we appreciate everybody listening today.